Hi everyone, so this is Intro to Unit 3. It goes quite fast as you see. The aim of this really is, I'm going to go to the objective slide, is to really start introducing you to the various fields where critical pedagogy might be used. So again, this is both in terms of developing your own reflection as to where and how critical pedagogy is implemented or might be implemented in current contemporary context. And obviously it's also to support you as you move towards the choice of your own project. So it's a fairly easy unit where you're going to browse. You're not going to be interested in everything. Maybe one of these areas will pick up your interest, and you might want to read the reading that goes with it. You may find that you do all of this, and you still haven't found the area where in which you're interested in exploring further. There is a second part to this in the activity on the forum. I've left out intentionally some areas of contemporary application just to get you thinking a little bit. And your activity this week is to actually highlight some further areas that I have not mentioned, and then we'll recap on this in the Collaborate session. So it is possible that you still don't get to see the area that you really want to focus on in this choice. There will be further selection in the topics that are brought up by you in the virtual forum, and then in the eventual conclusion and wrap-up that we do in the Collaborate session. But it's a good intro. Starts opening your scope and widening your outlook. In each case, I've provided a reading. On the slide, you'll find the abstract, which gives you a feeling of what might be discussed. And I've added some videos, some supporting material. Now, all of this is not necessarily exactly critical pedagogy, but it's definitely together comes as a good suggestive picture of where critical pedagogy might be definitely relevant to the 21st century and is creating emerging literature. So see this as not the sort of end-all be-all of critical pedagogy in that context, but rather as a suggestive sort of opening window into what it might be like in the area that's mentioned. So first of all, we have inclusive education. So as I've said before, we've got to be careful about inclusive education because inclusive education on its own is not sufficient. It's not political enough to really categorize it as critical pedagogy. And it needs to be that again, as we've talked about today, that conscientization, right? That realization of the process from the learner's perspective that they are oppressed, marginalized, and that they have to claim their right and change the systems. Now, if you think about it in a lot of inclusion, that's not what it is. First of all, it's teacher-centered, it's teacher-led, it's about creating equal spaces for students, but it doesn't necessarily have that sort of political dimension where really the power dynamics of the classroom have to be changed. And as a society or as a school, we take a new look at what might be required to level the playing field. Here, on the other hand, you will generally find some inclusion pieces that are sufficiently advanced to still fit within critical pedagogy. And I would argue this is one of those, right? Shyman, 12, differentiate instruction as a pedagogy of liberation. You can see in the title that she pushes the reflection a little further. And then you have a quick YouTube video that's it's called Dear Teacher, pretty popular. This is not that meaning that this is critical pedagogy, but the kind of outlook that you see there focused on learner voice and further learner claims and revendication and empowerment is going to be suggestive of the sort of work that we want to see when we're in the area of inclusion and we're looking for critical pedagogy, right? It's going to be student-centered, it's going to be political, it's going to be about rectifying sort of power dynamics and really pushing the agenda much further than just equity, okay? Race, obviously, I'm not going to spend too long on this because race obviously is a central part in critical pedagogy. I mean, I'm sure you'd have to be, pretty disconnected with news not to realize that the Black Lives Matter movement has had repercussions in the classroom. Obvious ones in the post-secondary classroom, but in the secondary classroom as well, and asks us to really consider existing inequitable power dynamics and how to change that and how to support the re-empowerment of racialized students in the classroom. So I'll let you read the text if you're interested in that. Whiteness and white privilege, problematizing race and racism, colorblind world in education. Very interesting article if you're interested in this area. And then you have two short illustrations, very different. So you have a good one on microaggressions, because often what we are seeing and what we want to address is at the level which isn't necessarily even racism, but it's, again, the systemic power inequities. They can be implicit, they can be non-conscious, but they lead to the sort of environments where our students are definitely marginalized, oppressed, and we have to do something about the systemic inequities. So you have a video there, fairly conventional video on microaggression. If you've never encountered that topic, there's a lot of literature on microaggression, and definitely some critical pedagogy initiatives that are targeting issues such as microaggression in terms of race. You also have, just for fun, a video that I love, which was on Saturday Night Live, called The Day Beyonce Turned Black. This has not necessarily got to do with school, but it's just interesting how they've done this little sketch. It's absolutely hilarious, and actually uses all of the vocabulary of critical theory. It's actually really well packed, and it's all in there. So I encourage you to watch it and really love it. And it's a good humor can be really powerful. It's a good humorous sort of approach to look at the sort of topic that we need to address when we are considering projects of critical pedagogy that are focused on race. Lifelong learners, this is definitely an emerging field for critical pedagogy. Here we have a text on pedagogy of change from theory to practice, but so it's fairly general. But if you look at some of what is discussed, right, this paper demonstrates how alternative pedagogies help students engage their own knowledge and position in capitalist society in order to understand their own condition. Through creative writing, students are forced into action in the process of creating themselves. Students choose what is important, actively engage in information, conceptualize new ideas. While the students engage themselves in non-traditional didactic activities, they still earn necessary entitlements of GED certificates and transition to college. It's a text that doesn't explicitly sort of box this into the notion of lifelong learners, but really this is something that's very suitable to this area. So it'd be a good lens when approaching lifelong learners. So it might be adult learners in education, in continuing education, that maybe don't have the initial degree. It's all about using people's identities instead of just pretending that they're conventional learners. So connecting the learning back to their actual life experience as non-traditional lifelong learners, and actually incorporating the sort of events that have meant that they have not followed a traditional sort of approach to education, rather than making abstraction of it. So making it central. So that political sort of piece is definitely there, because you're re-empowering those learners rather than trying to make them blend. You are sort of placing the focus on reconnecting the curriculum to their lived experience and making it palatable to their life experience. And then you have a video also that I can't remember which tackles, but it's connected to this somehow. So there's a lot of videos. I've watched them again, but I've forgotten what this one is about. I don't want to make a mistake, but you'll see the connection. So the next topic in second language acquisition is something that is particular to my context. You have a text which is fairly general, like critical pedagogy in classroom discourse. You can find it interesting in various contexts, but I've always read this and really connected with my experience as a French second language teacher. Particularly when it comes to communicative studies. So for those of you who are into language acquisition or maybe have interested in language acquisition, a big movement in the 21st century has been communicative approaches, communicative methods. And this is something that has set second language acquisition away from traditional education, in the sense that it's been one of the fields in secondary education and post-secondary that has argued very adamantly and very fervently that you don't learn through second language through books or through a teacher or in a conceptual way or through textbook approach, but you learn language through communication. And communicative studies go further, communicative approaches, and argue that not only do you learn best when communicating, but that really that communication has to be purposeful, right? So you don't learn a language because you feel like learning a language. You learn a language because you wish to communicate with someone. So your desires and intentions in the act of learning are contextualized in an environment that's socioeconomic, historical, and social, and that leads you to want to do something with people, and also positions you as an actor, right? You do this because you want to take on a role in society with these people. All this to say, and you've got a video there on communicative language method if you've never looked at it, that it's almost impossible to teach language acquisition through communicative methods without rethinking the positioning of the learner. If you want learning to be relevant in communicative methods, you have to really think about what is that person, who is that person, what are they trying to achieve, who are they, what is the position, the stance that they're trying to achieve, and then to give just to create supportive activities that allow that person to take on that identity, right, and make identity central to their learning. I'm rambling on a little bit here, but we can expand further. It's definitely a field that, for me, it's a field that I'm very interested about, and there's definitely a huge space there for critical pedagogy when we look at second language acquisition from a communicative methods approach. Particularly when you look at it happening in a global South context. It's hard to teach someone who is in Vietnam or is in Latin America through communication methods and making them learn English without positioning them as someone who is inherently in a context of post-colonialism, and then integrating that context of post-colonialism into the very act of learning the language. So it's not, you see, a neutral act of learning a language. It's an act of learning a language in a context, and that context positions the learner as having to question, again, the power dynamics that they are influenced and subjected to. The very act that they want to learn a second language is often the language of a colony, an ex-colonizing power, is something that makes them reflect in their stance and their desire. Why do they want to do that? So it's in both an act of empowerment in the context of disempowerment. Anyways, I stopped wrangling, but it's very, very interesting. And the text can be applied in other contexts, but I've given you to in this context. If you are interested in looking for projects that actually look at that, you will find several. Online learning and technology-rich environment. So there's a huge body of work, obviously, looking at critical pedagogy in the 21st century within an online environment. This has increased definitely since 2019 with the pivot, online pivot, and the current COVID crisis. You've got a text there. Boyd, what would Paulo Freire think about Blackboard, critical pedagogy in the age of online learning? It's a powerful text. Got a little video there about new literacies that's very short and a bit of bad quality, but it brings up some interesting ideas about what are new literacies, right? So there's a whole parallel reflection around the way literacy has evolved through a technology-rich environment and critical pedagogy, because you will see that in the video, we now no longer look at literacy as in reading and writing, but it's actually about being able to decipher discourses in distinct places. And then beyond that, the definition has evolved even further to saying it's actually not just about understanding the language of various spaces, such as financial literacy, news literacy, etc. But it's also about creating content for these different landscapes. And the ultimate emergence of that reflection on new literacies is to say it's to create, through the production of media, it's to create an identity within each of these separate, distinct landscapes. And as soon as you start talking about identity, then you've got a very close connection with critical pedagogy there, because if you are producing content, you're saying something about yourself. So the possibility of conscientization and of finding a place where you can achieve transformative action by having a voice is very strong in these contexts of new literacy through media. And we'll come back to that, and we'll give some practical example. You're going to find a ton of things there, definitely interesting. Sort of technology being a vehicle for voice, identity, and re-empowerment. Lots of critical pedagogy happening there. Education of migrants, particularly interesting, critical pedagogy in the education of migrants, because we quickly realize it's not just about teaching people, again, language or the basic curriculum, but it's actually about recognizing the very difficult lived experience that these people have had as they arrive in a new host country. And education having to recognize this lived experience, that sometimes traumatic experience, and giving space for the learner to reflect on some of the power inequities they have lived and gone through, and then trying to re-empower themselves as they establish in a host country. So lots of interesting things. You have a text here about Chan, critical multiculturalism, because multiculturalism in itself doesn't go far enough for critical pedagogy. But here she talks about critical multiculturalism, supporting early childhood teacher work to work with immigrant families. And then you have a news item that's pretty general, but shows you the kind of work that people are having to create and implement and initiate in, for example, border towns in the US, where the ratio of newly immigrants children is higher than the ratio of domestic students. So the notion of traditional education doesn't work there anymore, and it's certainly a context that's ripe for critical pedagogy, for again recognizing this experience, this sort of the experience of the individuals that are present, instead of just teaching the curriculum and pretending that they fit. Obviously, LGBTQS plus safe classrooms, you have a lot of literature around this. It's a bit like race. This is a huge area, so this is just only an illustration. You have a text there by Dylan Boy called Radical Love in a Time of Heteronormativity. It talks about glee, etc. It's a fairly accessible text. You've got and it's not the abstract here, but you do have an extract from the text. And in terms of giving you an illustration of what that might look like, I want to draw your attention back to the Matthew Shepard incident. So some of you may be way too young to remember this, but the Matthew Shepard incident in the US was really a traumatic thing for the LGBTQS plus community. So this young man, I think it was in Texas, no one quite knows what happened, but eventually it was picked up by these two straight guys, and maybe it was a rage incident, etc. But they took him out of town in Laramie, Texas, and they beat him and they hung him from a wire fence in a crucified sort of position on the wire fence in a field outside Laramie, and he basically bled all night and died. So he became a huge sort of poster child for hate crimes. It's actually Matthew Shepard was actually instrumental. The crime was actually instrumental in creating hate crimes in several states in the U.S. And then it led to the creation of the Laramie Project. And here you're right in the heart of critical pedagogy. So the Laramie Project really is if you watch the video, you'll see it. It's a project that really traveled for a long time in U.S. from school to school, through performance and media and film, and I was introducing basically schools to the Matthew Shepard tragedy, to get discourses going into schools. And so this goes beyond safe schools, because really this is about actually creating again that conscientization and an empowerment from LGBTQS plus students in school in the face of this tragedy and the face of sort of hate crime. Obviously, just an indicative example. There's a lot there if that's what you want to explore, including critical pedagogy-based LGBTQS plus schools. They exist. So some of you are interested in that, you are going to have to dig around, but I'm not going to hand it to you, but there are some out there. Homeless youth. So again, here it's a prime area for critical pedagogy. You've got a text there, the strength of young people who are homeless, because a lot of the work with, so homelessness, if you're not familiar with the phenomenon of homelessness in terms of academic study, academic scholars tend to really make a differentiation between older homeless people and younger homeless people. The motivations are not the same. The strategies for exit of the streets are not the same. And the lived experience of these people are not the same. There's sometimes, unfortunately, a sort of romanticized approach to homelessness in youth, of young kids, sometimes obviously leaving home for reasons that they have no control over, but also definitely a part that gets quantified in the phenomena of also having actually a high level actualization. So really wanting a different life, living off the grid, refusing certain neoliberal capitalist value, etc. And you don't see that in the older population, it's only in the younger population. So a lot of work around critical pedagogy happening there, because really this isn't about just giving people a home. If you want them to exit the street, you've got to actually find a discourse and strategies that talk to that malaise, to that unease, and actually recognize it and manage to give them a space where it can become voice and lead to transformative action. So you've got a couple of videos there on interventions with homeless youth, which just to give you context. But the interesting thing is Dans la Rue. Dans la Rue is a Montreal non-profit organization that's been around for about 30 years for homeless individuals in Montreal generally. But Dans la Rue has a lot of services for young homeless individuals, and particularly it has a school. So that's what I invite you to go and look at the website. Is going to it's only brief detail, but just to look at the fact that we always consider schools to be set in conventional environments, but There are actually schools such as that one that cater specifically for the needs of students who are homeless. And again, you're going to have to think that the pedagogy that happens in these schools is obviously not traditional. And that's where critical pedagogy might come in, how to re-engage the students who are otherwise disengaged from society, but somehow are still attracted to this notion of school and learning. So a lot happening there. To finish off, just the notion of pop culture and critical pedagogy. So I've left you a copy paste there of an important work by Denzin called Performance Ethnography, Critical Pedagogy and Politics of Culture. I don't think you're going to read it, but it's a good work of reference, even if it's too old now. But there isn't that much done in terms of academic work there. And this is one, it's a big volume. So that certainly created a formal recognitions of the links between critical pedagogy and popular culture. We will come back to this, and there's a whole unit on film, to be honest, and popular culture, because the links between critical pedagogy and popular culture are very are frequently apparent and are very tight. You will see that critical pedagogy is interested in popular culture as a vehicle for dissemination of its ideas, and that popular culture, vice versa, is very interested in critical pedagogy in terms of representing some of what we discussed. So it's a two-way stream which connects critical pedagogy with popular culture, sometimes more than with traditional academic format dissemination. So take and pick what you want there, and realize that Denzin's text exists. If you don't know what Denzin is, Denzin and Lincoln are two authors who are sort of archivist research. They write a book, Lincoln and Denzin, which is one of what we call the Bibles on research. So when you took your course on intro and research, you have Cresswell and Cresswell, but the other one is Lincoln and Denzin. So really, really very long established, recognized, huge authority. So making this book was really important in that sense, that it's more of a margin sort of topic, but Denzin spent time creating an entire volume dedicated to this. So in terms of illustrations here, you have on Vimeo there, you have Listen, which is a film created by a young man traveling the US and using camera and video to engage on the reflection about youth and therefore school and education. So we're going to come back to this a lot. If you are trying to engage your learners and create a situation for conscientization and want to give them voice and support identity building, film is going to be very important, and integrating film into classroom is going to be very important. So some space for reflection there as you look, and this would definitely lead some of you towards some projects which are involved with media production. And that fit well within critical pedagogy. Then you have a link around hip-hop. Hip-hop is a huge part of critical pedagogy. So you've got an article from The Guardian there about the use of hip-hop in English schools for the purpose of critical pedagogy. So again, here we have the connection with performance, or either stage performance. In the previous example, it was film. And then you have an article by a TED Talk by Christopher Emdin, who will come back to several times. Christopher Emdin is someone you should have squarely in your sight, because he's a huge voice in critical pedagogy in the US at the moment. And again, he links hip hop with education, and he's very charismatic. He has a lot of interesting things to say. So again, this video here, how to create magic, is one that you should definitely look at now, and sets the tone for your reflection on critical pedagogy. That's it. So as I said, I've intentionally left some areas of emerging literature and scholarships around, and practice around critical pedagogy in 21st century education out. That is your topic of engagement in the virtual forum this week. So you are to think and first of all explore some of what I've covered now, but also think of what could be other areas where critical pedagogy is relevant, 21st century education. And if you have not just a thought, but perhaps an example, and perhaps even better, a journal article that also supports that would be great in the same format as I've indicated here. And you've got some references there, which are the texts also that are up here in Moodle. So that's it. As I said, a fairly easy ride, but a deep reflection at the same time. That's going to widen your scope and widen your reflection around what does it look like and where we find this in the education landscape. And then we'll pick up from there into the unit 4, which will be even more hands-on, and we'll really start to look at what does it look like in the classroom, right? With more readings actually focused on the very detailed application of it in classroom. Speak to you soon.